Welcome to the Off Leash Podcast with Dr. Pete. I am your co-host, Molly Van Braken, and we're so glad that you joined us for today's show. Remember, we're not here to say what you want us to say. We're here to be an advocate for your pet. And this is going to be part 2 of the email questions that went out last week. Well, I guess this is part 2, but this is like the third time that we've done the question.
Sure, yep.
So we're going to jump right into it. This question comes from Gary W. Jerry, sorry.
Yeah.
I have 2 senior males, Westies, one with copper storage disease in December of 2023. What felt like an endless trial and errors with different food, I switched to Voyager in September 2024. After a year on penicillamine, we stopped the medication in February, and in recent blood work indicates ALT still within normal range, thankfully. However, both boys suddenly have high triglycerides
Yep.
in the 700 plus range.
Yeah, and this is one of those people I call back to get a little more information. It makes it easier for me to answer the question if I know a little more. So they're 13 years old, I think, quite old, and although they're not brothers and sisters or whatever, but certainly we understand there's a hereditary problem with Westies getting copper storage disease, and one of these dogs did get that. And apparently I talked to her and she said the triglycerides have always been normal because she looked at all the past blood work samples and there was no high triglycerides there. Now, I don't know whether something happened to the liver when you were under being treated with the depenicillamine for a long period of time. I hardly ever use depenicillamine, and really I'm the exception to the rule as far as what I do. I mean, I'm kind of respectful of that drug because I think it does have some problems or it does have some some negatives to it. So, for me, I like to just give depenicillamine long enough to get everything going the right way, and then I'll feed the food and see if I can't make my hay with just doing some depenicillamine in the food. This dog was on for a long time, and the ALT is back in the normal range. So the ALT being the enzymes that are leaking from the liver cells, what they call hepatocytes. Think of it as, let's say, a water balloon with a little itty-bitty pinhole in it that's leaking. And that's what you're measuring. You're measuring that transaminase, the ALT. The T stands for transaminase. And it's very specific for the liver. We know that's exactly where it comes from, is the liver. So when we see the ALT high, there's a few other organs you can get a little bit of ALT from, but really for the most part, if you have an high ALT, that's very condemning of inflammation in the liver. So the triglycerides, a separate situation. In fact, those dogs we sometimes refer to as having tomato soup blood. So there's so many lipids. There's so many lipids in that sample of blood that it really appears like tomato soup. Campbell's tomato soup with some milk added, and so we understand that causes a problem. We see that a little bit in schnauzers as a hereditary thing. Hyperlipidemia is what that's called. Hyperlipidemia. And we see it from time to time, and we recognize those dogs, and they show up in a litany of ways. Sometimes they have, every once in a while, you see one of those dogs with a layer of fat or a layer of triglycerides in the cornea, in the eye. You switch the foods, and like within 2 or 3 days, the lipids go away.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it is.
Do you want me to read the question?
Sure.
I never got to the question.
Well, so this is kind of I have a attention deficit disorder, so I'll answer the pieces as you pour them out.
All right. My general question is, what contributes to the high triglycerides in dogs? And in my case, could the food have caused such a dynamic increase in the numbers? They don't receive any treats other than some 99% fat-free cooked turkey as a food topper. Thank you for all you do to keep our dogs healthy and for being the forefront of battling copper storage disease.
Well, you're welcome. We're glad to do that. Let me tell you this, that any dog food that has an awful lot of fat in it, that's always a recipe for hyperlipidemia. And so when I called her back, she says, well, she's given turkey 99% fat-free turkey. And I'm like, is it 99 or is it 97 or is it 93? What is it? Because on 93% fat-free turkey, and a lot of people say, well, it didn't have much fat, and it was 93% fat-free.
Right.
No. It's 80% water. So the 20% left you got, a lot of it is fat. So what it looks like a 7% fat diet is actually a 35% fat diet. See, now you can break that all in fifths because you got 20%, 20%. The last 20% is actually dry matter. And of that 20% that's dry matter, 35% of it's fat. So we can't count the water. Now, all these has to be is on a dry matter basis. So this is kind of a math question, and I'm used to figuring those out in my head. And
Right.
most veterinarians are, but most clients aren't. So I would tell you, she assured me that it was 99% fat-free. So that means it was 1% fat, which really turns out to be 5% fat, and really shouldn't have a problem with the 5% fat. And these were cookies they were making, or she was putting on it as a topper. Topper. So, I've had hyperlipidemic dogs that were getting 93% fat-free turkey.
Wow.
Just let that be a lesson to you. Just because it says it's fat-free, it is not fat-free. It is a diet that is 35%. It isn't exactly like feeding pork lard, but it's not far off that. So it's one of those things where you can get hyperlipidemia from that. She was sure it was 99% fat-free. There's hereditary dogs as they get older have a hard time holding their triglycerides in check. Is that what went on here? I don't think so, because none of our diets would be really construed as being overladen with fat.
Right.
Not at all. And so I don't know what happened to her dogs. I really don't. I'm glad her ALT is back in the normal range. There may be something that happened when she went through this episode that's made them more susceptible to having all those chylomicrons in there, and that's what kind of contributes to that. In fact, in Schnauzers, I was kind of relaying to her that in Schnauzers, every once in a while I get a Schnauzer. It's been fine his whole life. He shows up at 12 years of age, and he or she is having seizures. And so I do a little blood work. Lo and behold, hyperlipidemic. So all those chylomicrons kind of screw the head up, and they change that seizure threshold and make it easier to have seizures. And less times you put those dogs on low fat diets, really ultra low fat diets, all that just goes away. So I don't know what's happened here. I didn't get a chance to see all of the blood work, and I don't know where she started at with her ALT or any of that sort of thing. But the minute she said fat-free turkey, I'm like, oh, let's see. But she's on a 1% fat-free, which is really 5% when you take the water out.
Right.
So I don't know what's going on here. But hyperlipidemia can be a problem. Those dogs are much more likely to get seizures. They're much more likely to get pancreatitis. They're much more likely to get a lot of things.
Yeah.
And a little bit of this is kind of like us. We get older and we have cholesterol problems, and it's like, I didn't have cholesterol problems when I was in 10th grade. Oh, hell no. You were in 10th grade.
Mm-hmm.
You could have.
It's developing now.
Yeah, you could have been eating pork fat sandwiches, and nothing would happen to you because you can get rid of it. You're able to get rid of that. As you get older, your ability to clear that stuff diminishes.
Makes sense. Okay, you ready for the next one?
Sure.
This comes from Irene S. Hello, my Dobie, 4 years old, has very serious GI issues for 8 months. He stabilized on Altamino. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, that's a royal canin diet. It's actually made out of chicken feathers.
Okay. Hydrolyzed chicken feathers?
Yep, hydrolyzed chicken feathers.
And started the first of this year. I slowly transitioned him to your food-sensitive stomach diet. He's doing fine on it, and I think that I'd like to transition him perhaps onto the Pollock. We're currently on a subscription. Can you give me any advice on whether or not it is worthwhile on transitioning to one of your non-hydrolyzed diet foods and how best to go about it?
Well, she could certainly try that, and you want to try it slowly. But I would be cautious because what I'm hearing is that you were on diets and you were having issues with it. And when you went on a hydrolyzed diet, and I'll repeat this, I probably said this 50 times on this show before, but hydrolyzed diets where they cut the proteins into little pieces so you don't recognize them. And
so the dog absorbs them rather than breaking them down, because the breakdown of the protein is what causes the allergy.
Right. And really, I was trying to explain that to somebody one time. They really didn't understand it. So I said, well, think of it this way. And I showed them a barcode on a bottle. I said, see the barcode? I said, if you just take one of the bars out and show it to them, it doesn't mean anything. If you take 2 bars out and show it to them, it doesn't mean anything. It's all those bars in a row at the same thing. So that's what the protein is. So the body's going to recognize that protein. Now we have a number of things in our other diets, more grains and all those sorts of things. But I'm kind of cautious. If she's on a hydrolyzed diet and doing well on it, she's really welcome to try the Pollock diet, but if she has a problem, she should go back to where she was at. I get the whole deal. The hydrolyzed diets are much more expensive, but if they work, they're cheap. If they don't work, they're expensive.
That's right.
So you transition back to the Pollock. That's a fish-based diet, but it has some chicken in it.
Right.
And so what she would do is just try it. And if she ended up any place near where she was before, then she'd go off it and go back to where she was before.
Right.
So this is a I don't want to. She may have to trade up, to trade down, to trade down, to trade up, and so she may have to buy expensive dog food to drink.
Cheaper beer.
Yeah, I was going to say cheaper beer. I didn't want to make people think she was a beer drinker, but you get the idea.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was a kid, a young veterinarian, they didn't have cat carriers back then, so people would bring their cats in
Laundry baskets?
No. Yeah, well, maybe they did, but I don't remember that part. I remember the part where they brought them in beer crates.
Oh,
where they would hold 24 bottles.
Yeah.
And they were paraffin lined, and they were really heavy cardboard and everything because there were bottles in there. So, and they worked really good. You usually just put a little twine or something around it so the cat couldn't get out. So you do that, but you could always tell what their budget was based on what kind of beer they were drinking. So there was something really kind of skunky called Alpsbrau at the time. It was a really ultra cheap beer, and it's kind of
what's the equivalent of today?
Oh, I don't know.
Busch Light.
Back in the day, maybe red, white, and blue, which was a Pabst thing.
Okay.
Yeah, and so cheap beer. Just really cheap beer.
I don't know what cheap beer is.
I don't know what cheap beer is anymore either, because they really don't have cheap beer. But in the day, they used to have some really skunky beers, and you could tell the people who brought the cheap cartons in, the cheap.
You never know; they might be drinking cheap beer.
Well, they were drinking
Alps bill.
And they're drinking Alpsbrau, and I'm thinking, well, they're not going to go first class here because they're drinking Alpsbrau. So I shouldn't have thought that, but.
Maybe they're, like I said, maybe they're drinking cheap beer to pay their vet bill.
Oh, that's what we used to do. Try to determine how much money they had to spend by the quality of the beer they were drinking.
Fair enough.
So now they come in, they have a cat carrier, and unless they got a beer can in their pocket, I have no idea what their budget for beer is.
There you go.
But that's right. People they trade up to trade down. They'll have something really nice in their possession, but they'll have something that they really don't care for, but they can only afford that in their possession also.
I like it. All right. And the next question comes to us from Charles. He said, question about my dog having mild kidney disease, and if it is related at all to copper in his food.
Okay, probably not, although copper does get stored in the kidneys and can cause, and I've referred to this before, Fanconi's disease, Fanconi syndrome, which means the basement membrane part of the kidney gets damaged. I don't really know that I can definitively say that some of the kidney failure that we see is related to copper being stored in the kidney. But if it's making the kidney unhappy, certainly that wouldn't make it function better. Mm-hmm. But most of the time, and I'm going to guess this, did he say how old this dog is?
No, this was a very short question.
Okay. So if I knew the age of the dog, and sometimes you're going to call in with stuff, give me all the particulars because, I'm sometimes referred to as a dim bulb, but occasionally the bulb comes on. If you say something I'm familiar with, then I'll say, okay, now I know what you're talking about. So usually what happens is, anything you own, it really, and the analogy here is, you build a house and you drop a well point, mm-hmm. and you start filtering water out of that well point, and it's going to last, 10, 15, 20 years. And whatever it's doing in 20 years isn't exactly the efficient way it was doing it when it first got dropped down. So, and that's really a filtering mechanism, just like that pipe in the ground for your well. And so the guy will come out and say, yeah, it looks like your well point needs to be replaced, and you replace it, and it goes back to working good again. So, and dogs were not really allowed that, although I think there's places in the country that do kidney transplants. But that all being said, I would suggest if you define these as early stage kidney failures, you can really help yourself a lot here by using phosphate binders and really the correct diet. And the correct diet is normally either a senior diet or probably even better is a kidney diet. And kidney diets have lower protein, and most importantly, they have lower phosphorus. And then what you do is you monitor it and see how you're doing. And if you're doing well, then you're doing
And you
well.
monitor it through blood work.
Blood work, yes.
Okay.
Right. And typically what you do, you get a kidney failure dog, and usually you do a urine analysis and make sure you're not looking at some raging kidney infection, that you don't have sepsis in the kidney, and that's why the kidney's failing. But usually you've lost 75% of your kidney by the time this rooster comes home to roost. And does it mean that your dog's going to die in the next 3 months or 2 months or 1 month? No, not necessarily. But it means with with the proper treatment, you can maybe get in a couple of years more out of everything. So identify them early. They actually have a thing called an SDMA. I'm not sure quite how helpful that is, but you put all these things together, your blood urea nitrogen, your creatinine, your phosphorus, your SDMA, and then you look at the urine. Are you concentrating your urine? So what do you mean by concentrating your urine? My dog's not in kidney failure because he's making a lot of urine. No. You're running a lot of water through there. It's just not being filtered appropriately.
Right.
That's all we're talking about.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Okay. So probably not a sign of copper in the food related to kidneys.
I mean, I couldn't totally rule it out, but I wouldn't. It's not high on my list.
Okay. This next question is coming in from Angela B. I am recently starting my journey with my pup Raina on high liver enzymes. I'm getting my Voyager delivered tomorrow. Can you talk about high liver enzyme types and contributing conditions? Okay,
so obviously copper storage disease, that'll cause problems. You get copper in there, and the liver's not happy, the liver's not happy about it. There's a oxidative occurrence, and the liver gets mad and starts spewing out liver enzymes, ALT. You can also have immune-mediated. We see that. In other words, the body has decided to whack its own liver. We see that from time to time. And then the other thing is chronic active hepatitis, a suppurative one, where you actually have a bacterial infection in the liver. And those things are really hard to diagnose without biopsy.
But you can do it a little bit with blood work with the high ALT?
Yeah, if you do a CBC and all your chemistries, and you actually have an elevated white count.
CBC?
Complete blood cell count. So you're looking at the red cells, white cells, what kind of white cells. So you can have incriminating evidence. Does it mean you have the ability to convict infection for being the cause of that liver disease? Not necessarily, but certainly it's a place to start. We start them on antibiotics and see if there's an improvement when you do that. And you have to make sure you pick the right antibiotic.
Right.
And that, quite frankly, is hard to do. I've got a couple of dogs now. One dog I picked an antibiotic that people don't like to pick, which is chloramphenicol. And that was at the suggestion of a friend of mine who's an internist. He said, you might try that. His whole thing was, you know what you need to do? Biopsy it and do a culture and sensitivity. Okay. And this is an old dog not doing well. And I'm thinking, I don't think these people want to do this. But maybe they do. We'll see. But yeah, do you have all sorts of things? The other things it can have is, tumors. You could have a tumor in there causing high ALT. There's a whole bunch of stuff that occurs. And there's horses and there's zebras. So there's half a dozen zebras and about 4 horses. So do you know what I mean by that?
The normal weight outweighs the...
Well, when you hear pounding hooves, most people turn and expect to see horses. Okay. Every once in a while you see a zebra.
Okay.
That's where the zebras come from.
I see.
Yeah, it's not a football reference by any stretch of the imagination. But sometimes I see this and I think, lots of times I think, oh, I know what this is. This will be this. Oh.
Nope.
Wrong.
It's not.
Yeah. Oh, and we talked a little bit about this. I mean, last time somebody brings a dog, it's got a lump on him. Hey, that feels like a fatty tumor. Okay, we'll stick a needle in. Oops, a mast cell tumor. Well, I guess I'm right some of the time, just not all the time. And I'm glad that we did the fine needle aspirate. And so, so you collect data on the lumps, so you collect data on the liver.
Right.
You do a complete chemistry profile, and and you look at everything. You look at the thyroid. You look at the, you look at the kidneys.
Outrule everything.
Yeah. You just look at everything and see how it all pieces together.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not easy, and if I told you it was easy, I'd be lying. And but the longer you do it, the easier it gets. And some people are much better at it than others. But, at least you have some inclination. It's always a nice thing about data. You collect it, and sometimes you can call. If you have friends like mine, really smart friends, from time to time you can call and ask your really smart friend, what the hell is this anyway?
Right.
Yeah.
So for Angela, you would just say immune-mediated chronic
Well,
hepatitis.
See, she would have been fun.
Things that would have contributed to the high
When
liver
she said,
enzymes.
and she said liver enzymes. Now I don't know what liver enzymes are, because sometimes I read this and I call the people and said, what enzymes are elevated? She says the alk phos. Well, that's a liver enzyme, but it's not the liver enzyme. The liver enzyme is ALT. So if your alk phos is elevated and your ALT is normal, it's probably not copper storage.
Okay.
But a lot of people put dogs on Denamir and Ursodiol, all based on a high alk phos. Well, alk phos can be from bone inflammation, can be from muscle inflammation. There's a litany of places alk phos comes from. But ALT, that's different. That's almost always from the liver.
Right.
So you can, if you got a high ALT and you had a high alk phos, you may have a bunch of stuff going on. There's some endocrine diseases or, like Cushing's. That's one of those things that causes that. And so we see that from time to time. But anyway, I should have probably called her and got a little more information. And then I would have looked a little more intellectual answering this question.
Okay.
But I didn't, and I don't.
That's okay. That's okay. We have what we have to work off of. That was actually your last question of the day.
Oh, it is? Okay.
So we will be doing this segment probably once a month.
Okay.
So if you are a listener and you would like to submit a question, please go on to our website, VoyagerDogFoodCo.com, and submit your email so that you can get email subscription letters.
Yeah, and if you have questions in regards to these things, always kind of quote unquote spill your guts, because once
put more information.
Yeah, put in more information.
More is better.
And kind of write down everything you're suspicious of. And I don't mind reading long questions. It'll just get you a long answer, or it may get you a really short answer. In some respects, today more information would have given you a shorter answer.
Right.
Yep, and a more explicit.
This is not one of those situations where less is more. This is not one of those.
Yep.
So we're going to wrap it up today.
I make a motion, we adjourn. Do I have a support?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody want to talk about this?
Support?
Yeah. No, support. It means you second the motion.
Oh, I second.
Okay. You want to talk about it?
No.
Okay. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Adjourned.
Right. We sure appreciate you guys listening along with us today, and we hope that you've been able to share some information that will help you love your animals as much as they love you. Don't forget, always treat the treatable, prevent the preventable, and we will catch you on the next one.
Did Marvin vote yes?
No.
Okay.
I haven't done community. What do you call it when you get submitted to court?
Community service.
Not community service. What do you call it?
Oh, you mean when you were on the justice panels?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never gotten.
No, just remember, Molly, they wouldn't be there if they weren't guilty.
That's right.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, bye.